Hello and greetings to all. In this video today, I'm actually going to discuss as to how to account for the spare parts and servicing equipments and similar items under IFRS. Now, this is one of the biggest issues, and IFRSs are pretty silent on these topics. There are two basic issues that we need to consider in them. The first one is that should we recognize and present them as a part of PPE or inventories? And secondly is how we need to depreciate these major spare parts that become a part of PPE. In this video, I'm actually going to discuss the first part, and that is that in case of spare parts, whether we need to consider them as an inventory or whether we need to consider them as PPE under IAS 16. Now, when we talk about this classification needs to be a correct classification, whether to be considered under IAS 2 or IAS 16, because this leads to necessary implications over a period of time. And in general also, it is important for us to remember that in most cases, spare parts are generally treated as inventories. But under IAS 16 para 8, it is very clearly mentioned that spare parts are to be recognized under IFRS as PPE only when they meet the definition of PPE. And therefore, here we need to consider the following criteria. Number one, the purpose for which these spare parts have been purchased. I'm again repeating, the purpose for which these spare parts have been purchased. And number two, the important aspect is that the time period for which these spare parts are being used in the organization. So the first part is the purpose, and the second part is the time period for which they are being used in the business organization, in the entity. Now, if these spare parts are consumed in the production process, whether to produce goods and services or to provide services or to be held as mechanisms for resales, then they are to be considered as inventory, else they need to be considered as PPE. So if they are consumed in the production process, now whether to produce goods and services or even whether to render services, or they are held as a merchandise for the purpose of resale, then they are to be considered and classified as inventories, otherwise they need to be considered as PPE. Secondly, if the spare parts are needed to operate some asset, or they are needed for a period of more than 1 year or one period, then they are to be considered as PPE and not as inventory. So I'm again repeating, when it is to be considered as inventory, when it is consumed in the production process for the purpose of production or for the purpose of resale, then they are to be considered as inventory. But then if the spare parts are there or are necessarily required for the purpose of operating some other asset, and that too used for a period of more than one period, then they are to be considered as PPE and not as inventories. In other words, spare parts are held for resale, consumption in the production process, and if they are meant for rendering services, and that too for a period of less than 1 year, then they are to be considered as inventories. And on the other hand, if spare parts are to be held in operation for the purpose of working of an asset, that too for a period of more than an year, then automatically they need to be considered as PPE and dealt under IAS 16. But then this is not the end, and then there are certain other 2-3 important issues that we need to consider. Let's move on to them. The first aspect is materiality. We cannot ignore the aspect of materiality while deciding whether the spare part is to be considered as a PPE or as inventory. Now, sometimes an asset is used in the production process, and that too for more than 1 year, but then the acquisition cost is very less. It is very small. And then on the other hand, there might be huge amount of spare parts or similar servicing equipments which might be of huge quantity and bigger amounts. Now in such cases, the question arises, what to do? Now here we have to judge, and we have not only to judge the materiality aspect with the asset level, but we also need to consider materiality of the whole group of asset in the financial statements. For example, in any kind of an organization, if there are 2 hammers and 1 screwdriver, which is again used in the production process and which is used for a period of more than 1 year, then also in this case we need to account them as inventories and expense them in P&L account. Why? Because the cost of the hammer and the screwdriver is not that important or that big or that material to be considered as an PPE. But on the other hand, if I increase this number and I say that there are about 12 to 15,000 hammers and 7 to 10,000 of screwdrivers in an organization, then automatically the cost becomes material with respect to the financial statement. And if it is material with respect to the financial statement, then automatically we need to consider them as PPE and dealt under IAS 16. The second aspect that we need to understand is the unit of account. Now, as per IAS, it is very much clear that it is up to the entity to determine how will it apply the recognition and the measurement criteria. That means whether we need to consider them as an individual asset and show it in the financial statements, or we need to consider them as a group of assets and show them on an aggregate basis. So either we account for individual screwdrivers of maybe $10 per screwdriver, or and that to 7 screwdrivers, or we can account for 7,000 screwdrivers of $10 and consider it and record it at a cost of $70,000. Both the options are possible and both the options are correct. But then the first one is difficult and not economically feasible or viable. And also, therefore, it becomes all the more reasonable to account them as one item of PPE and then record it under IAS 16 on the aggregate value of the whole number of the screwdrivers and the hammers. And lastly, we need to not forget that in certain cases, there are certain minimum levels of inventories that are required to be maintained, and only after that we can operate the asset. And that is, for example, the oil refineries. Now, in case of oil refineries, you have to maintain certain minimum level of oil, and only when that minimum level of oil is there, beyond that you need to, only then you can operate and you can actually use those refineries. Now, in such a situation, what to do? Now, in this kind of a case, what generally happens is that the minimum level of oil is to be accounted as PPE, and the remaining level of oil which is to be used and utilized is treated as inventory. Hope I've been able to clarify and able to give you a big picture of what and how the spare parts need to be treated, whether as per IAS 2 or whether as per IAS 16. Who am I? I'm Dr. Jasmine Kaur, founder of Tishadz.com and comprehensive IFRS learning platform, and I'm here to clear all your queries and doubts regarding to IFRS. Do pinch me, do let me know, share this video, and then let me know what all other topics you would want me to discuss. This is an interactive platform, an open platform for IFRS discussion. Till my next video, keep smiling and stay blessed.